Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. We're now into our third interview for our Red Shirt Effect. To remind everybody, we're meeting with people across sport or who sport has touched in their lives. We started with Scott Morrison, NBA coach, moved on to an Olympic bobsledder from London, and now we're pleased to be joined by Bill Mauro from Thunder Bay. Good morning, Bill.
Hey, David. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, really excited to talk to you. Now, as I was preparing for this interview, I was trying to think about how we first met, and I'm pretty sure it has ties to sport as well. As my memory serves me, I think your brother was coaching me back in Little League Baseball, and I think that's where you used to come out to some practices and where I got to know you. And obviously, your dad was highly involved with baseball. Is that your recollection of our first meetings?
I've got a vague memory of that, and then also I do remember when I graduated from Teachers College, doing a bit of student teaching, and John Zanata and his wife used to call me in to sub for them when you were at St. Pat's, and I remember us having a teacher-student game against you and your cohort. With some of the teachers, and John sort of dragged me out to that. And I remember being on the court with you, and I remember Zanata hollering at me, "Billy, take the ball from Pino, take the ball from Pino."
Well, it's interesting, just as an aside, before we get into some of the questions, it seems like the more people I talk to about sport who are either my age or older seem to have a more broad base of sport that, as you said, you played some basketball, and we were talking earlier about some of the other sports you're involved in. It seems like specializations become more of an issue in recent years. But when you look back in the day, we played everything, didn't we?
Well, you've nailed it exactly. And as I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today, that's one of the things that absolutely jumped to the forefront of my mind was when we were kids. So much of what we did was unstructured. It was, and so what we did just became instinctive, and many people who are my age have thought for a long time that the specialization that occurs in almost all sports right now, I think it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think if you take hockey as an example, and I was involved with some AA teams, and these kids were playing so much, that I think at the end of the day, maybe it produces better players, but I do worry about how many kids get left behind who might end up being the best player because early on they didn't get the good coaching, or they didn't get the extra ice time, or dad didn't build a rink in the backyard, or you didn't grow and you didn't get big fast. So this whole issue of specialization is an interesting topic, but like you said, when we were kids, we played everything. Everybody played everything. Multiple sports would overlap with other sports. In high school, you'd be playing football in the spring season or in the fall season, and hockey would start with the back half of that, and then basketball would follow football, and the back half of hockey would still overlap that. So you just kept jumping around, and I think there were a lot of benefits to playing multiple sports. And I think you see the Europeans are really interested in that model. They believe it's the best thing to do.
Yeah, I've long been a big proponent of it, and have had lots of arguments that I think in the end it does produce a better athlete at the end. I think there's a time when specialization obviously comes into effect when you get to elite levels, possibly past grade 10 or whatever. But it's certainly, I think the multi-sport athlete system creates a more healthy society. Is what I'm seeing. It was interesting. I got to chat with Greg Hamilton when the World Juniors were here in Thunder Bay, and he's a big proponent. He was a two-sport athlete. He's the junior national team coach for Canada, and he's encourages athletes to maintain two sports or more as long as they can, and certainly looks for that kind of athlete. So, yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear. I think the thinking is starting to snap around on it. And I've always felt that's a good thing to do. I think you're acquiring skill sets that you're not even aware of when you're playing multiple sports, and many of them can translate to whatever your sport ends up being. And I do like what you said, because I agree completely. Yeah, specialization at some point, but not as early as it's happening today.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start off. Today, I was hoping to talk a lot about sort of the role that sport, recreation, and fitness. I know you keep pretty fit, and you're a runner, and certainly golfing in the summer, and that how it shaped who you are. So I want to start by kind of going back to sort of the early years. You talked about, growing up and unstructured play. Talk about sort of, how you were raised. I know I think there was 4 kids in the family, born and raised in Thunder Bay. What role did sport play in the early years for you?
Well, when you reflect on it, David, it was not something necessarily that as a family our parents directed us to. I mean, it just sort of happened. We grew up. It was a very busy household with my parents running a small business, and with 4 teenagers, and so it really dominated a lot of our time as a family. And so we just found our way to it somehow naturally. We grew up in a neighborhood that was full of young kids. It was a big growing neighborhood, Northwood, in the late 60s and the early 70s. You just stepped out your front door and you hollered and you had a game of something. Literally, we had a big hockey rink, lit boarded rink right beside our store. We were always on the rink in the winter when you weren't doing something that it was involved in a team sport. And there were so many kids around. You were either playing baseball or hockey or kicking a soccer ball or whatever it was, you were doing it. You rode your bike to the golf course or to play baseball. We used to take our rakes and our shovels to prepare the baseball diamonds as kids. If it was rained in fear that our game might get rained out, we'd ride down the chapels and do that. We'd sneak on Chapel's golf course when we were kids to play golf. So it was just there. It just evolved. I think it had as much to do with my friends, my circle of friends when I was young. We were all inclined that way. And, as youngsters, as I reflect on it, we really benefited from the efforts of a lot of organizations in the city who provided the opportunity and who provided the avenue through which you could participate in sport. You think of organizations, and it's easy to take them for granted, but when you think of Knights of Columbus and the Elks Lodge and Moose Lodge, which was our Little League baseball, when you think of the money and the fundraising they did to support hundreds, if not thousands, of kids, and the volunteerism that went into those men and women who worked very hard and volunteered hundreds and thousands of hours over their lifetimes, it really is remarkable when you reflect on it. So I was just fortunate. You grew up in a time where there was lots of opportunity, where there were lots of kids. The leagues were robust. My school or my circle of friends was very inclined athletically as well. And so, just very fortunate. It just sort of happened organically. It was not something that certainly our family wasn't directed to. It just happened on its own.
Mm-hmm. Now you talk. It's interesting. You talk about sort of the sense of volunteerism. Obviously, your dad was probably a key influencer for you. I mean, was a highly recognized volunteer in our community. I believe he's in the Sports Hall of Fame as a builder. Talk about that. I know Louis Nistico, who had recently passed and was a Thunder Bayite who made huge inroads in Ottawa as a volunteer. Talk about that and the fear of losing those key people.
Well, boy, I hadn't thought about Louis, but of course, his brother Gary is a great friend of mine still.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary and I played junior hockey together. But Louis actually was a Little League All-Star baseball coach of mine, David, when I guess we were 11 or 12 years old. Fort William Nationals, I think we were, or can't even remember who the heck we were, to be honest with you. But yeah, you think of people like like Louis and others who I had as coaches. Joe MacArthur is a name a lot of people would recognize, and Barton Bradley, who I had as a senior baseball all-star coach. Him and Freddie Bakary. Barton Bradley was the head scout for the Boston Bruins, and back in those days, you could still live in Thunder Bay and do that work. So we had a lot of great influences in our lives. And they say youth is wasted on the young, and I think certainly I think it's fair for me to say, you don't really appreciate what they're giving to you when you're 12 years old, 14 years old, 16. Hopefully, as you get a little older, you start to recognize the contribution that these folks are making. And yeah, I had a lot of them in my life, who were putting in hundreds of hours. And when I think back on it, I did about 4 or 5 years of coaching hockey and a similar amount of time coaching baseball. But I also thought often how much I missed it, because when I became an MPP and was basically back and forth to Toronto for 15 years, I often thought about how much I would really love to be able to be in Thunder Bay and be coaching something at some level. I really enjoyed my time doing it, and missed that opportunity greatly when I just simply couldn't do it. But I think all of us, I mean, obviously you've got a long connection with sport as well in Thunder Bay, and I'm sure you've got lots of great influence as well. So it's important that we recognize those folks who've been part of our life. And, I think back of it too, what I really amazed at, and I take my brother Cheech, who coached you, when I think back on Cheech getting involved as young as he was, because he must have been in his early 20s when he was taking you guys to the Canadian Championship. So look at those young people who get involved and stay involved, and we're just lucky. We're fortunate to have them and the organizations that support them.
Yeah, it's amazing when you look at the influence that a coach has and just the number of lives that they affect. And I think back through all my coaches, and sort of what they brought to my life, and what coaches bring to other kids' lives in our community. And when Louis Nisticle passed away, I didn't know Louis, but my son's playing hockey in Ottawa, and I noticed all the tweets in Ottawa, Baseball Canada tweeting out. So he had a huge influence in that community. You mentioned your brother. Yeah, when we reminisce about that team, I mean, he was in his early 20s taking a group of 11 and 12-year-olds to St. John, New Brunswick. Certainly, some of the best memories we have. In that vein, let's talk about sort of your sporting background, some of your favorite sports, which ones you still enjoy. Give us a sense of that.
Well, as we said earlier, the group that I was involved with, we played everything. You named it. We played at either unstructured or structured baseball, basketball, football, hockey, golf. But what I realized, David, about myself as I got older, I started to realize I really did enjoy the individual sports more. I started to migrate more. Squash was a game that I picked up later. We never got taught squash. We didn't have a coach. There was a bunch of us that were reasonably good athletes, and we sort of got involved. To me, maybe the best game that I've ever played in terms of the skill sets that are required to play that game, in my mind. I used to joke with my friends, this sport will never become popular because it's too difficult for people to get good at it. And so, but sports like squash and squash and golf and running, I began to realize I really enjoyed the individuality of it, because you're responsible for your own success or your own failure. There's nobody to blame it on. It's up to you to try and achieve what you want. It's up to you to stick your neck out there a little bit and risk the failure that will inevitably come to some degree when the individual sports are there. But the team sports, of course, were wonderful as well, because through that, my goodness, the lifelong friendships that I achieved, and some of my best friends still to this day are people that I met through sport. You're learning these social skills that you're not even aware of. And today, we're all realizing, I think, that through this pandemic time, when we don't have that same access to sport, how much we appreciated it, and how much perhaps we didn't realize we would miss it if it was gone. And so for both of them, as I said, our cohort, our age, we played all sports. They overlapped each other, and the unstructured part of it, I think, was really important as well. So it's been a huge part of my life, and still to this day, I plug away. The running is not what it used to be, David, but the injuries kind of cropped up. Nothing serious, but I can't seem to stay at it very long before something happens again. But I still go out once in a while. I miss it greatly. It was one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, I always wondered about squash, why it never sort of caught on. I mean, it's obviously still present in our community, but I think you're right. I think it is a sport that's very tough to play, and I think because of that, you see maybe less people playing, but great sport for sure.
You could get a 250-pound guy who would beat the best athlete in the city if the best athlete in the city didn't know how to play squash.
Didn't know how to play.
That kind of game. Multiple skill sets required.
Yeah. Now talk a little bit about, you've got a couple of boys. Am I right in that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Tell me a bit about how sport has sort of influenced your role as a father and in raising them. I know they participated in sports. I remember them in some of the high school sports.
Yeah, I think they did. It's interesting when you think of the high school sports. They didn't, both of them didn't get too involved in there. My older boy a little bit more than my younger boy, but certainly, still involved to some degree. I think that probably a bit self-consciously my influence was there on them in terms of what they were doing. We certainly didn't force them into any sports, but they did both participate when they were young, and through that, I think they got the same benefits and experiences that you and I have talked about, that you received as a young athlete, and that I received as a young athlete. And yeah, and I think to this day it'll carry them through and continue those friendships, and hopefully some of that, part of what we haven't talked about too much is this idea through sport that you get hopefully some thought process that about physical fitness and maintaining it throughout your older years and your adult life, as it gets a bit more difficult. So it's certainly one of the lessons I think we should all take from it. I mean, when we were young, interestingly, like, we just never trained. The
That's right.
training when we were in the late 60s and the 70s, what was training? Almost nobody ran, almost nobody stretched, almost nobody lift weights. You just played. You played sports, and that was your training. And so obviously that has changed dramatically. I'll tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
Because Dougie Henry as well.
Oh yeah.
So when we were playing senior baseball, this would have been in the mid 70s. I can remember being in the dugout at the Port Arthur Stadium, in one dugout, and Dougie was playing for a team called the A's. And I can remember like yesterday watching them come out of the dugout and walk down the first baseline thinking, what are they going to do? And Dougie had come back from university, and this was the summer, mid 70s, and he led them in a stretching exercise. And David, as odd as that might sound, that's the first time I'd ever seen anybody do anything like it. So it just shows you how things have changed. That's almost 45 years or so ago. But it's truly remarkable. So there's these things we never did, the training, the weightlifting, the running. And so anyway, you get these things from sport. They carry you through the rest of your life as well, that you adopt when you're younger.
Yeah, I think you're right. Certainly the sort of the personal fitness side of things, and we're even seeing it with our schools, is more of a focus, but there was a lot more of the fitness sort of under the umbrella of just playing sports. And that's how the men's league basketball, scrub hockey, that kind of stuff that filled that void perhaps more in the past.
And David, if I can, just for you,
Yeah.
I should mention, we talked about coaches, and I really didn't mention it. And if it's part of your program, it'd be great, because I was so lucky in my high school sporting career. Some of the coaches that we had were just remarkable. I had people like Bobby Thayer, who many people will know, and Bobby really taught us what it was to be tough. Peter Young. Now, many people may not remember Peter, but Peter went off to an amazing broadcasting career in Winnipeg and did local sports, and he'd be coaching us in football. He'd run to CKPR, do the news, come back and coach us some more. People like Jerry Carlson and Roger Bradford and Peter McDonald, and man, the list, Jack McMahon and Bob Main, who were my high school basketball coaches. And man, I remember Jack pulling me aside one day when I was having a bit of a bad attitude during a game, and he whispered a few words into my ear that I never forgot. And Jack was a really soft-spoken man. So through high school athletics, I was just blessed with some tremendous people. Many of them, unfortunately, have passed. Roger and Jerry are both gone, and who just gave so much time and energy. I mean, we were so blessed at Churchill High School with the breadth of coaches that we had. And I think most high schools in our day were blessed to have so many. And you think about you with your career with a guy like John Zanata, how lucky were you to be exposed to someone like John Zanata?
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly life-changing relationships for sure. Now you talked a bit about the lessons learned through sport that I think in many cases you don't realize you're learning, whether it's teamwork or time management skills, because you got to get your studies in before you head off to practice, or dealing with adversity, that kind of stuff. Talk a bit about how those lessons that you realize now you learned have helped you in your political life.
Well, it's a good point, David. The time management piece, especially, I would say. When you're younger, again, you're probably juggling a number of things, and you're not really aware of the skills that you're acquiring, including a bit of time management and priority setting and discipline and the like. And then as in self-discipline. And then as you get older, I think for me, what I began to realize was how important it was, as your life got busy in a different way, to ensure you carved out some time to maintain an ability to do something athletically. And for me, that became running. That became, for me, in a lot of ways, my go-to. And the beauty of running was you could do it anywhere at any time. You didn't need a partner. You stepped out your front door with a pair of shoes and away you went. And you could get in a great exercise in 30 minutes to an hour or an hour and a half, depending on what you were running or training for. And it had enormous benefits, both physically and mentally. And so, yes, definitely, when you're young, you're learning a certain skill set, and the value of that skill set, it gets imported into your life, I think, in a different way as you get older, because you realize the importance of maintaining some room in your life for some of what you just did as a matter of course when you were younger.
Yeah. And now, do you recognize some of those lessons when you're in, the political forum, and, whether it's, getting along with council, and maybe something you learned, back from playing basketball for Jack McMahon, or, things are uber stressful because you guys are having to figure out budgets. Do you recognize when those situations arise?
Well, I
Or it's
think
just part of who you are now? Yeah.
yeah, I think you need to, I don't know if it was through sport or just the way you were brought up, but you just need to. And perhaps when I was younger, I wasn't the best at it, but I had a bit of a temper when I was younger. But as you get older, the discipline kicks in, and you just, through the sport, you need to be respectful of the people that you're competing with. And I guess if I was to think of how that might translate, into the political world, if I could, I mean, yeah, there's lots of frustrating moments politically. 15 years as an MPP was a bit different, because when you're attached to a party, that's more of a team game. And we've talked about team sports, but when you're doing it on city council, there's no party. There's 13 individuals who all have their own ideas about what should happen, and what maybe is the best way to go. But you need to be respectful as best you can, of everybody's opinions and their efforts, and respect the work that they're doing as well. So maybe a bit of a translation there from sport over to the political world.
For sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you talked about maybe not recognizing going into the pandemic, sort of, the impact of sport. But how do you view sport sort of post pandemic, in terms of community recovery, and the importance of that aspect of it?
Well, certainly, I think that sport is one thing, and there will be many others that I think people will have and realize and appreciate how much it brought into their lives and how fulfilling it could be. And it's as much, I guess, about the sport as it is the socialization and the teamwork and the partnerships and the friendships and all of that came with sport. You can apply that to a lot of things, where people, this isolation, I think that so many people are feeling, and so many are unfortunately struggling with, as a result of the pandemic. They don't have access, to these same avenues and outlets that we did pre-pandemic. We're hearing a lot about it with, high school students who are missing their friends, who are missing athletic pursuits. I think probably more important for them than people that are a little bit older than me, or that are my age, rather older than the students. So I think the appreciation and the realization of its importance in your life will be greater post-pandemic.
Mhm.
Hopefully, as the vaccines roll out, as herd immunity is achieved, we will be able to return to what we had taken for granted for our entire lives. I guess
Mhm.
that's still to be determined. I mean, I have to believe that we will get there. But certainly sport it's a huge part of our culture. I think there are, and the culture of the world, not just Thunder Bay, not just you and I, but sport is vitally important. It has an economic importance, but it has all of these other pieces to it that really, really are tremendously important. It's one of the things that people look forward to. It's what they want to do with their time, when you're not at work. What are you going to do? What is it that you're going to do? So sport is massively, massively important, and the ability to provide those opportunities, especially at a younger age. And I've talked about this as well, David, and as a city, from the city context now as mayor for Thunder Bay, how I truly do believe it's one of the ways as a northern, rural, very almost remote community in a very large province that Thunder Bay can distinguish itself and make our city an attractive place for young professionals, for anybody where they want to move. It's one of the things that people look to today in terms
Mhm.
of what is available to me and my family when it comes to those other amenities beyond your job and your work, because that's the primary motivator of where you will live as a young family. But certainly the other amenities are as important. And sport is a huge part of that. And so it
Mhm.
has all of these massive benefits to it. But again, to your question about post-pandemic world, certainly I think I think the floodgates are going to open and people are going to rush back in and they want to see their friends and they want to have fun and they want to laugh and they want to smile, they want to sweat and they want to compete. And I think we're going to see that in spades.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so now with every interview we've done sort of three fun questions to kind of get to know the person we're interviewing a little better. So my first question for you, of the four major sports, who are your favorite teams?
Favorite teams. Okay, this is sort
Hockey.
of hockey. So here's my answer. I've always pulled for all the Canadian teams,
Go
but I
figure.
guess I have to say Montreal Canadiens.
Oh, there we go. That we can accept. Uh,
Okay.
Baseball, because I know your family was a big baseball family.
Oh, you got to go Canadian, man. You got to stay with the Jays, right? I mean, I'll tell you the honest, longer answer again. Maybe this isn't going to make it off the cutting room floor with you, David. But when I was a
Yeah,
kid, like a lot of Italians, New York Yankees all the time.
that's my
100%.
team.
Okay, but here's the story now. When
Yeah,
George Steinbrenner was still the owner of the New
yeah.
York Yankees, he turned them into a sideshow. He
Oh,
hired and fired Billy Martin 6 different times. So here's
yeah.
my story. When Steinbrenner turned him into a sideshow, a 3-ring circus, I'd had it. I'd had enough. Even though all the Italians had to pull for the New York Yankees with DiMaggio and Yogi Berra and Phil Rizzuto and all of them, Joe Pepitone. I don't know if you remember that name, Joe Pepitone.
Yeah.
Anyway, I gave up. I said Steinbrenner's making a mess of this with the Yankees, and now we got the Jays in Canada. So it's the
Yeah.
Jays. All right.
Okay. Well, I stuck with them. I mean, Don Mattingly was my guy, and
Yeah, he was a
yeah,
hell of a player.
exactly. Basketball.
Oh, come on. You got to stay Canadian. You got to go Raptors,
Okay.
right? You got
Raptors,
to go
yeah.
Raptors. We're having a bad time right now, but you got to go Raptors.
And
Yeah.
football, you can choose CFL or NFL.
Well, football's easy. I used to be a big CFL fan, not as much anymore, but for me, that's easy. Green Bay Packers all the way, baby. How about you?
Okay. Well, I was a 49er fan, so yeah, I'd have to say Joe Montana.
Yeah. Hard to go
Hmm.
wrong there.
Exactly. Favorite sports movie?
Ooh, sports movie. Probably, I'm bad on the names, but what was the one where if you build it, they will come, the baseball diamond,
Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams. That
That's
one
mine
pops
too.
into my brain. I thought that was spectacular.
Yeah.
But there are more, but I thought that was pretty deep, pretty cool. If that fits your category, I'd say
That
Field of
one.
Dreams comes to mind. Yeah.
No, that's an excellent one. Okay, and last but not least, dream foursome, either with us or not. Who would be your dream foursome
In golf.
in golf?
Wow. So my favorite guy which goes off script for me. I always was a Nicholas fan, but
Yeah.
usually I pull for the underdog. Nicholas was never the underdog, but for some reason I was pulling for Nicholas. So I guess I'd have to have Nicholas in there. Does it have to be a golfer?
Nope.
No.
You can
Okay,
do
so
whatever you want
I
with
would
these
go
guys.
Nicholas. Boy, oh boy. Probably, I would have loved hanging around for a while with Barack Obama if I would have had a chance. I'd have liked to pick his brain a little bit. But probably, let me go back. I would say for me, two of my heroes, I own two for sure, with Terry Fox and
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, Terry Fox and Martin Luther King Jr. So
Yeah.
probably those two. And then the fourth, I'm not sure who I'd pick as the fourth, but those two guys, I guess if I think of heroes, those would be the two I'd want to hang around with for sure.
Excellent. Super. Well, we really appreciate your spending some time with us. It was great to get a sense for you and to get a good perspective on sort of how sport has influenced your life, and hopefully we can, make some inroads with the red shirt effect, and hopefully handle this pandemic over the next while, so we can all get to competing and seeing each other on the fields and on the courts.
Well, I look forward to it, David, and congratulations on the work that you're doing here. I'm sure this is going to be impactful to some degree. So thanks for doing it, and thanks for including me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.